Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
Well, we go to Exhibit C. I would say on Exhibit C, we've talked the last couple of Wednesdays about how much oil to expect from Iran in 2025 under the Trump administration. And I've cautioned, and in fact, these numbers I put in had them down by 500,000 barrels on its way to being down 1 million barrels under the theory that the Trump administration and the Iranians might make a deal to remove sanctions. I think with the activity in Syria, that's less likely. I think that if Israel hadn't been as successful at removing leadership and soldiers and whatnot, Hezbollah, they probably would have gone to the rescue of the Assad regime, but they clearly didn't. So the fact that, Iran has lost its land bridge to Lebanon, it may make them less likely to agree at this time to lift the sanctions. And there is the possibility that they start to work harder on their nuclear program. In fact, the UN team that reviews how Iran's doing with their nuclear has said they are accumulating more highly enriched material, which they could make a bomb out of. If they decide to, rather than negotiate with the Trump administration, to just have a push to become a nuclear power, you would think that the sanctions would get much tougher, and that might be a move towards higher oil price. If we use Brent, if there was a deal where sanctions were lifted, we'd expect Brent to get down in the 60 range from where it is now, around 72. On the other hand, if they proceed to complete half a dozen nuclear weapons from their rich uranium, we would think that it'll be higher than 72. You might have $80 Brent. And it's tricky because if the United States or Israel decides to do more, in addition to sanctions, to use missiles or planes with missiles to try to discourage Iran from doing that, Iran's pretty clearly said to Saudi Arabia that any damage of their facilities are going to result in damage to the Saudi facilities. So we could go from having an oversupplied market to a substantially undersupplied market. So in past Wednesdays, I've been saying, well, the range is 60 to 80, and if the incoming Trump administration made a deal to lift sanctions, 60 would be pretty much in order. Now I would say with the activity in Syria, a little more likely to go the other way or maintain the status quo. On Exhibit B on natural gas, the only concern, and I say this most Wednesdays, is that the U.S. production not be more in 25 than 105 Bs. The tricky part of that is it was 104 Bs in October of 23, and then drilling fell off and some gas was curtailed. The Platts numbers now show it running 103. If it got to significantly more, like a B or two a day, more than 105, we would not see that recovery to 340 that is built into the futures market. Everyone says AI on demand for power, but as far as it looks to us, if you look at the power line, it's going up about 1.5 Bs per day per year, and that's what we think is going to continue. Mike and Jason have pointed out in other Wednesdays that the people who are building these data centers and the people who are running large language models are being able to do it more efficiently using less power. And, there was a time when people in the tech industry said that, the limitation on large language models of data centers can be power. I don't hear that quite as much anymore. I think people are coming to terms with being able to do it with, without too much increase, 1 or 2%. I mean, power for the longest time is flat as a board, but it started to go up the last few years. So we think it's just going to continue to incline, not result in holding back data center construction or large language models because they don't have enough power. You kind of agree with that, Jason? Or?
For the short term, that seems like it's holding true. But then Elon's announced he wants to take his 100,000 GPU cluster to 1 million.
Right.
So a 10x increase in more power. Yeah.
More power.
And that'll all be in one location. So
Right.
in Memphis, it'll be interesting where he gets the power. Some other solutions people are looking at is finding intelligent ways to link data centers together so they can be physically separated and still perform the training as one system.
Right. Right. I'm going to skip Exhibit A and we'll go directly into the subject that Jason and I have been discussing. We'll pull Mike in, but on Exhibit A, it's just what will Ramaswamy and Musk come up with, I think, and hopefully it'll be very productive. No one seems to think having them out there talking about government efficiency is a bad idea, but I think as each week goes by and we get closer to January 20th, we'll have something more to discuss on Exhibit A. But to go to this point about is power going to limit data centers or running large language models, Memphis is unusual in that they bought it, the initial installation there was 120 days. Microsoft and Meta and Amazon are not doing anything like that.
Right.
Mike and I have discussed, and Jason and I are doing too much of the talking, Mike, this idea that you can't go beyond 32,000 GPUs, what was the genesis of that? Or is that industry scuttlebutt? Or is that something that NVIDIA officially said? Or what exactly is going on there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm not sure the technical reason, but my understanding is it had to do with mainly the networking and how you made the networking work so that all the GPUs could be contextually aware of each other at the same time. And they reached some sort of a physical limit to that scaling with at around 32,000 GPUs. So the data center design kind of became important, and people started focusing on how to network separate clusters to make them work together. Well, the XAI team apparently Elon Musk was active in the actual design of this thing and maybe credited with the unique solution, which is pretty fascinating for a guy as busy as he is. They were able to scale it up to 100,000, and it seems like they're able to scale it beyond that. So that changes some things, and it's changed other people's approaches as well, including Amazon, who's got plans now for a 400,000 Trainium 2 GPU cluster. Now, the idea is that would be all of them working in the same context, and they would be in different data centers. So that, it's another complex kind of solution. The point of all of this is there's multiple ways to scale these models. We've seen maybe some limits to pre-training scaling or some reduction in return. But there are so many other ways to optimize the training of these models that we just don't necessarily know yet. So the thought on that 100,000 GPUs is that it probably drove additional sales of the H100 because people that have existing H100 systems are now saying, okay, well, let's scale these things up more. And it will likely be beneficial for the Blackwell clusters as well.
So would you think for the next couple of quarters that NVIDIA would continue to report higher revenues given this push to be first in the arms race and have larger clusters, Jason? Or is that, or maybe there's not the capacity to deliver that many?
That's that could be the case as well. TSMC is constrained on their packaging process where they actually physically assemble the chips.
Right.
I would wonder if the data centers are constrained on their space capacity at the facility they built the data center in.
Right.
They probably didn't leave any rooms unfinished.
Right.
So it'd be a big undertaking to build a separate, construct a separate facility.
Yeah.
But it could remove some lumpiness when there's a new generation coming out and sales tail off of the previous generation.
Because that's what you'd expect to see. You expect to see the H100s tail off.
Right.
And in fact, I think a couple of months ago, Microsoft said, or one of the scalers said, they were going to, maybe it was Amazon, they were going to acquire fewer H100s and focus more on the Blackwells.
Right. Because they were putting in their purchase orders for Blackwell at the time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this latest, put 100,000 in rather than 30,000 gives the H100 a longer life than would otherwise be the case with the successor model coming out.
Right. You could buy more of the previous generation's chips than current.
Right.
Yep. Still
What about
capacity
questions?
constrained. So it's
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Now, this is kind of a positive thing for U.S. participation in chips. I believe I've read or heard from one of you that the Arizona facility, the TSMC, is actually turning out 3 millimeter, with better statistics than in terms of rejects and whatnot than Taiwan.
Right. And it always ramps up the fab and how many errors, how many rejected chips are produced, and you get better at it over time. But their starting point was much better than anticipated.
Right.
Yeah. So definitely good news.
Because what I remember from some number of months ago, the TSMC was complaining that they couldn't get the productivity in Arizona, even when they brought engineers from Taiwan.
Right.
And they said when they took U.S. engineers and sent them to Taiwan to be trained, that didn't help either.
Yeah. Seems like it did.
And Morris Chang, who's now retired, was saying, hey, we tried this in Washington State and it didn't work many years ago. So maybe it's not going to work in Arizona. So to have the Arizona fab get up so it was equal in terms of reject and whatnot with Taiwan is really quite an achievement.
It is. Yeah. And then since then they've announced they're going to build the next generation, the 2 nanometer there
In Arizona.
But it will always trail what's happening in Taiwan because they have an agreement with Taiwan that they will
Right, the government of Taiwan?
leading edge. Yes, they're required to keep the leading edge there.
Interesting.
So it's probably a year. They're probably a year behind then.
I think they're more like 2 years behind.
Okay.
So does this take some of the political risk out of TSMC?
Well, take NVIDIA, for example. If NVIDIA was producing their chips at Arizona, they still have to ship it back to Taiwan just to do the CoWoS packaging. So we're still a long way from being able to be independent of China if that's the goal.
Yeah. But TSMC.
But still, there's a little light on the horizon.
Yeah, we're
It
making
is.
progress, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Certainly better progress than what's happening over at Intel.
I've got page 3 open. These are a couple of weeks old, but Taiwan semiconductor equity value is just under $1 trillion as compared to NVIDIA at $3.5 trillion. When you weigh those two, well, the fact is NVIDIA, because they have no capital spending, has free cash flow of like almost 70 billion, and Taiwan Semiconductor only has 15 billion of free cash flow, but that's because they spent 20 billion building fabs.
Right.
So NVIDIA, from any kind of statistical analysis, is really a superior machine
Right. Today.
to that.
Yeah.
So
And-
what could Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, and my belief is that it's basically they need to maintain process. We'll call it process leadership, kind of in the same way that Intel was always had kind of the best solution. And that means that NVIDIA, as Taiwan Semiconductor goes, so does NVIDIA. Now, maybe Intel Foundry establishes itself as a quality business that can be depended on for outside customers, and maybe they get back to process leadership and actually are designing better things than what's available at Taiwan Semiconductor. But until then, as the way that TSMC goes, that's the direction for NVIDIA as well.
I think one thing that could change is potentially with the changes at Intel, they're not going to succeed in producing a fab that's at the leading edge. And if that's the case, then TSMC is a monopoly on leading edge chips. So the chips that are in these AI processors and the chips in mobile phones. And if they're solidified as the monopolist, do they start pulling the levers that a monopolist can and having higher margins on their wafers, on their produced chips, which then would eat into the margins of an NVIDIA more so than an Apple, since NVIDIA's in the business of selling chips and the processor in an iPhone is just one component. So,
Right. So now I've read somewhere, maybe in a selling magazine, that Jeff Bezos is back at work at Amazon.
I heard that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, 90% of his time or something like that.
Yeah. So he built that really huge sailboat, and it didn't keep him happy for that long.
Oh yeah.
That was the one where they had to move a bridge in Holland to get it down to the ocean. I think in the end they took down the mast. But assuming that the founder is back at work, does he look at the NVIDIA valuation, the TSMC valuation, and start to think that if he picked up the fab at Intel and somehow made it work, that he could have an integrated operation that could give NVIDIA and TSMC a run for their money? Bezos back from retirement could start to focus on, or is that just kind of outlandish?
Oh, I don't think it's that outlandish. I think between Bezos and Musk, there's at least a couple of suitable suitors, if you will, for turning around Intel. I think that in a weird way, it's like uniquely well positioned for Musk because you'd have to go through and gut the company and kind of start it anew. But I don't know that he's ready to take something like that on his plate again. So I guess we'll see.
Well, these guys have a history of succeeding in outlandish thoughts.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Like specializing in them,
Yeah.
like colonizing Mars.
So I think one of the big risks to NVIDIA is the inference business, where Amazon, Google, they're already building their own chips for inference.
Right.
And I expect that to continue
Right.
and accelerate. So if Amazon really wants to be the cloud where they're providing everyone's inference compute, that would make sense.
Right.
And then Tesla's, on the other hand, is their problem is running AI processing on video, which is much more data intensive than just text. So that's why he needs the 1 million processor cluster.
So you think that's for automatic driving?
I suspect so.
Yeah.
They just released their FSD 13,
Right.
and that's the one that's fully a neural net model.
Right.
So yeah, I think these big clusters are being used to train Tesla data.
Right. Can you just run it through for someone who's not as well trained and educated as you and Mike are? Exactly how will that neural network work in terms of enabling a Tesla on anywhere, not just in a particular state, to basically drive itself?
Yeah, there's two thought processes in autonomous cars, and the one that I don't think will succeed is you create detailed maps of the streets, and then have more of a rules-based system of, when you see these things, make this decision.
Right.
Stop sign, stop.
Right.
Whereas Tesla is taking the approach of capturing video from all of the cars driving around,
Right.
and just letting a computer learn by watching humans drive. How should a car drive?
Right.
And that's much more flexible. So if your detailed mapping changes because there's construction or the weather changes,
Right.
and it rains heavily, then in that situation, it may not make the right decision. And then what's the car do? Does it stop?
Right.
Does it make a poor decision?
Right.
Ask a human to intervene,
Right.
where in theory, if the computer can drive at the same ability of a human, in the Tesla case,
Right.
they'll just continue on.
Yeah. Can you build all this stuff in Memphis and have it be available in all 48 states?
Yeah, so they finish the model, and then the model goes into the car. So it's loaded on all the compute and processors in the car.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't need a connectivity. And that's
Right.
another drawback to the other solution. It's pulling maps and data from some central source.
Right.
It's a good point, Jason, because it's actually one of the constraints that they've put on themselves is that this full self-driving is going to be backward compatible with a lot of existing hardware that's been around since 2017 or somewhere around there.
Now, what is the Tesla model? Will you have to get a Tesla car to have this, or will it be able to be installed on other cars, or I assume that from a bringing cash flow down to the bottom line, you're probably better off saying, look, if you want a car that does this, you've got to buy a Tesla. Well, we're not going to fit it into a GM or a Ford or a Dodge or.
It's a good point, because Elon has said that he will license out the technology. But we're also seeing potentially the same model can't be used for all cars. The new version of full self-driving isn't available on the Cybertruck. And I suspect it's because the Cybertruck has much different dimensions.
Right.
So yeah, how much
let's just-
customization is
We
needed?
got to leave 5 minutes for healthcare, but let's just go through this again. You develop the model in Memphis, and then the model is installed on each Tesla vehicle.
Correct. And the data coming in that is processed in Memphis is from the cars driven anywhere.
So you continue to bring more input into Memphis.
Correct.
And then those models in each car are somehow the more recent information is passed from Memphis to the cars.
Yeah,
The information comes in from people driving around, and then it's passed back out again. Almost simultaneously.
yeah. So it'll go through a process of retraining in Memphis, and then an update gets pushed.
So if you're serving a like a financial services firm, you'd have to be within 15 or 20 miles because of the latency issue. That won't be a problem with running.
No, and in fact, they won't give you the update. I don't believe until your car is parked at home.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this might mean a great deal more. Even people who would prefer to have a fossil fuel car, they may wind up, getting Teslas just to have the full self-driving.
Right, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if Musk does a deal with some of the other automakers, because once they develop the model, it's got the marginal cost of selling additional models is zero, and it's pure profit. So it's not the worst situation. The question is, can you adapt the Model 3 hardware to fit into somebody else's car and not have to do a significant amount of retraining?
Right.
So we'll see.
So our $1 trillion market cap for Tesla with only $4 billion of free cash flow is basically most of that. What I would call overvaluation is related to building this gigantic data center in Memphis.
It has to be. Yeah, related to the self-driving vehicles.
Right.
Yeah.
So when Andreessen and Sequoia and whatnot invest in XAI, it's basically they're investing in the future of full self-driving, because that's pretty much what XAI is built to do.
I don't have a clear answer to that. I don't. It's pretty gray where the lines blur between the companies. Yeah.
We had that problem earlier when does the order for H100s, which are really short, does that go to Tesla? Does it go to XAI?
Yeah. Right.
Good. We have 5 minutes left. Any healthcare news, Jason or Mike, on Vertex or Lantheus or Harrow or anything else?
So Vertex, let me check my notes here. They have a deal with Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia has this Vision 2030 plan where they want to double the size of their biotech industry.
Right.
So Vertex and Saudi Arabia have a partnership now to develop a gene therapy production facility, because a lot of their population is susceptible to sickle cell.
Right.
So that's one of their large markets for it.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting.
Vertex has a partner in that.
They were a production partner. Yeah, manufacturing partner.
I try to remember, but why does Saudi Arabia have more sickle cell? There is that just...
It's a genetic condition, and it was originally the mutations protected you from malaria.
Right.
With the side effect being you hold less oxygen in your red blood cells.
Right.
So the trade-off. And that evolution, that mutation is prevalent there.
Anything more on the pain medicine or the diabetes?
No, nothing new. Yeah.
No. What about Harrow? Harrow continuing to make their way in the world?
An interesting bit of news from Harrow is they have a board member who is now the nominee for the head the FDA, Marty McCary. So he might actually make quite a bit of impact on the U.S. budget, being healthcare being such a big percentage of it. And he has some ideas around being able to save expenses, save costs there.
Right. By cutting the price of medicines or by organizing healthcare?
From what I understand, his big push is to have procedures have open, fair pricing. So price transparency, if a hospital is charging 4 times the amount for a procedure that the hospital down the road's charging.
Or charging insurance carrier a lot less than someone who walks in off the street.
Right. So one price for everyone. It's known up front.
Right.
You could say it's taking advantage of people not knowing the price of a procedure in an emergency situation, so yeah.
And post it almost like you're at a Walmart or something. Price for this is price for that. Good. Well, that gets us back to Exhibit A, because for the Musk Ramaswamy Commission to do much good, it's pretty hard that you've really got to get after the stuff that is automatic. Social Security, is kind of offset by the payroll tax, I guess. So it would be in 24, it would be the $1 trillion in Medicare and $600 billion in Medicaid. I believe Medicaid is about half federal and about half state. So the total government spending is $2.2 trillion. And since your gap is $5 trillion of revenues and $7 trillion of spending, it's hard to imagine that you're going to make any significant amount of progress without dealing with healthcare.
Right.
And,
so there's hope.
Yeah. I heard someone today say that the problem with government programs is they're calcified. I think they what? They just never get looked at, and so this commission may really do some good.
Yeah.
We have an announcement, as long as Jason agrees. Mike and I were talking this morning that rather than miss the last 2 weeks of the year, that we do 3:30 Monday, 12:30. So the Christmas week and the New Year's week, where Christmas comes on Wednesday and New Year's comes on Wednesday, we just moved the podcast up to 3:30 on Monday of both weeks. So we don't. Mike and I were worried. We said, well, now we only have one more Wednesday. How can we cover enough to be covered to the end? And especially with so much political stuff and, macro stuff going on. So we decided it'd be better to do 52 weeks a year. So we'll be Monday at 3:30 Eastern for the Christmas week, and then Monday at 3:30 Eastern for the New Year's. In the meantime, everyone be well and stay healthy, and we'll be here next Wednesday. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.